In a small town nestled between mountains and rivers, there lived a woman named Sarah. She was known for her kindness, always quick to lend a hand or share a laugh. But one windy afternoon, everything changed when she met Daniel at her favorite coffee shop. Sarah had seen Daniel around town. He was a quiet man with an intense gaze. In their small community, everyone knew everyone, and whispers followed him like shadows. No one knew much about his past, but everyone felt a mix of curiosity and danger in his presence. Today was the day Sarah decided she would break the ice. With a steaming cup of coffee in her hand, she approached him. She asked, her heart racing. He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Sure," he replied, his voice deep yet inviting. As they chatted, Sarah felt a connection she hadn't experienced in a long time. Daniel spoke about his love for painting and how he found inspiration in nature. But underneath his calm demeanor, Sarah sensed an unseen storm. As the sun dipped below the horizon, their conversation flowed naturally. Daniel smiled more and the air became lighter. It was as if the world around them faded away, but time taught Sarah that shadows lingered longer than sunlight. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah found herself looking forward to her coffee encounters with Daniel. Yet as she learned more about him, his past seemed foggy. She wanted to know the man behind the walls he had built, but he was always careful not to reveal too much. Their talks filled with laughter often stumbled when she asked about his family or his early life. Like glass shattering, she could feel his defenses rise. Then one day, Sarah decided to invite him to a local art exhibit she was attending that weekend. "I think it's a perfect fit for you," she said excitedly, her hands gesturing to the bright posters on the wall. But Daniel's expression turned serious. He shook his head slowly, his eyes clouded with something Sarah couldn't quite place. "I can't," he replied, the weight of his rejection hanging heavy between them. She pressed, disappointment washing over her. He sighed, staring out the window as if the answers lay past the hills. "It's not that simple, Sarah." His tone was firm but kind, leaving her confused. Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, as if he were pushing her away with every word. That night, unable to shake the feeling of rejection, she returned home and sat at her computer, her thoughts swirling. She wondered. Almost instinctively, she typed his name into the search bar. Daniel Collins. What began as idle curiosity quickly turned into a rabbit hole of information. The results were shocking. Articles popped up detailing a complicated past. He had been a rising artist, known for his bold strokes and emotional pieces. But there was more. A darkness hung over him like a storm cloud. A date stood out in her mind. He had been accused of a crime several years ago, a crime that had made headlines and left scars on his life. She read the words, feeling her chest tighten. There it was, a piece of the puzzle she never understood. Why he kept his distance. Why he was so guarded. The details twisted her stomach. It wasn't violence or theft, but a betrayal that had left his former partner shattered. The article she read painted a portrait of a man who had lost everything, a man struggling to redefine himself. Sarah's heart ached. She wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to let him know she was different, but fear mixed with uncertainty. With a heavy heart, she closed the computer and sat in silence. The revelation sucked the warmth from the room. She replayed their conversations over and over, trying to find clues she missed. Each moment now felt tainted, stained with secrets he could not share. The next day, she avoided the coffee shop. Instead, she spent her time walking through the town, grappling with her feelings. Her mind spun with the knowledge of his past. Was he dangerous, or had he simply been a victim of circumstance? Sarah had seen the rise and fall of people in her town before. She was no stranger to stories of redemption and ruin. But Daniel had drawn her in with his quiet strength, and now the allure felt tainted by doubt. She wrestled with her feelings, her mind racing through what-ifs. She felt a mix of anger and sadness. He could have told me, she thought. I would have understood. Days turned to weeks, and her heart felt heavy with unanswered questions. Sarah longed for closure and understanding of the man she had started to care for. The festival was around the corner, a grand event that would pull the community together. She knew Daniel would be there, painting in the open air, but approaching him felt hard. On the morning of the festival, she stood in front of her mirror, debating whether to confront him. She wanted to ask him about the articles, to let him know she didn't care about the past, but would it really be that simple? Her heart hammered in her chest as she thought of him isolated, painting, while she stood in her dilemma. When she arrived at the festival, the air was alive with colors and sounds. She watched as artists adorned the square with their talent. After searching the vibrant crowd, her eyes found Daniel. He was painting, completely absorbed, the sunlight catching the strands of hair that framed his face. As she approached him, he caught her gaze. A flicker of surprise passed over his features. For a moment, time froze. He dropped his brush and wiped his hands on his apron, his eyes searching hers for answers. He spoke softly, yet the tension hung between them like a taut wire. "I didn't think you'd come," he added, but his voice held an edge as if he were bracing for something. "I had to see you," she replied, her heart pounding louder than the festival music. He hesitated before nodding, leading her to a quieter corner behind some trees, where the sounds of laughter faded into the background. Sarah took a deep breath, her words rushing out like a river breaking through a dam. "I want to know why you didn't come to the exhibit." Daniel's brow furrowed, his expression shifting. I thought it was better this way. The openness in his eyes drew her in. But I've seen it, I know about what happened, she confessed. You could have told me. The vulnerability in her voice surprised even her. He ran a hand through his hair, the sunlight dancing in his eyes, revealing layers of pain that had long been buried. I didn't want you to look at me differently. Daniel, you're not a monster to me, she said, her voice steady yet soft. Everyone has a past, and yours doesn't have to define you. For a heartbeat, silence enveloped them. Her heart raced as she watched him absorb her words. The shadows seemed to lift slowly as he took a step closer. I do, she confirmed, seeing the flicker of hope in his eyes. I want to understand you. Daniel's posture relaxed. The weight of unspoken fears began to lift. I've pushed people away for so long. And I'm telling you, you're worth taking a chance on, Sarah said, her determination shining through. He studied her, and the corners of his mouth began to rise. In that moment, against the backdrop of laughter and vibrant colors, something shifted. The past still existed, but it no longer had power over them. They stood amidst a world full of uncertainty, yet somehow it felt lighter, full of possibility. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, turning everything golden, Sarah realized that life was unpredictable, filled with shadows and light. But sometimes embracing the unknown meant finding strength in the connections we forge. The journey wasn't easy, but it was real, and together they could walk through the darkness toward the dawn. Her voice trembled slightly as she offered him the opportunity, but the rejection was swift and firm. I can't, he said, shaking his head as he looked away. The moment stretched in the afternoon sunlight, filled with unspoken words. Sarah felt her heart sink. She had never expected him to say no. Daniel was the kind of guy who drew you in. Tall, with intense eyes that seemed to hold worlds of stories, he was both intimidating and intriguing. They had met just a few weeks ago at a local bookstore during a poetry reading. Something in the way they connected felt electric. As they shared casual conversations over coffee, Sarah couldn't help but feel an undeniable pull towards him. And now in this quiet park, she had taken a bold step forward, only to be met with a wall. She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He hesitated, a flicker of something fear crossing his face. It's complicated, Sarah, he replied, his tone almost apologetic, yet resolute. With that, he turned away, leaving her standing there, feeling lost. This was not the moment she had envisioned. And as she watched him walk away, a swirl of emotions crashed over her: confusion, frustration, and disappointment. There were so many questions left hanging in the air. What did he mean by complicated? After a restless night of tossing and turning, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee forgotten in front of her. She felt a pull, an urge to understand the man who had just pushed her away so abruptly. The mystery surrounding Daniel grew in her mind like a thorny vine. What could he be hiding? Without knowing quite why, she grabbed her laptop and typed his name into the search bar. The click of the keys echoed in the stillness of the house. As the search results flooded the screen, a mix of dread and anticipation washed over her. The first few links were innocuous, a personal blog, a few art show announcements, but the deeper she went, the darker things got. Her heart raced as she clicked. It detailed a scandal that rocked their small town a couple of years ago. Daniel had been accused of misappropriating funds while curating a community art fair. His name had been dragged through the mud. The fallout was severe. Many people lost their trust in him. The article went on to describe whispers, accusations, even an implied confrontation with some of his closest friends, leaving a trail of damaged relationships in its wake. Sarah's stomach dropped. The man she thought she knew, the one who made her laugh with his winding stories and intense passion for art, had seemingly fallen from grace. She felt as if she'd been punched in the gut. Why hadn't he told her? She had sensed his reticence, but she had never imagined it was anything like this. She spent the next hour reading every article she could find, each new fact pulling her deeper into a world of uncertainty and betrayal. Some comments from angry locals had been especially cutting. One read. Another declared. Sarah felt the weight of the town's collective anger bearing down on her. In that moment, she realized she had a decision to make. She could walk away now, pretend this never happened, and keep her heart safely tucked away. Or she could confront Daniel, find out the truth, and decide if he deserved a second chance. By evening, she had made up her mind. She would visit the gallery where he worked. Art was his sanctuary, and she hoped to find more than just a painting hanging on a wall. She wanted to see the man behind the art, the man she was slowly beginning to care for. As she entered the gallery, the atmosphere transformed. Bright colors dazzled her eyes, and soft music floated through the air. The space felt alive, buzzing with creativity. But the moment she laid eyes on him, her heart sank. Daniel stood at the far end, his head bent low as he touched a canvas. He looked lost, consumed by his thoughts, and it struck her how lonely he seemed despite the crowd. "Hey," she said, hesitantly approaching. He looked up, and the flicker of surprise that crossed his face was quickly replaced by a guarded expression. "Hey," he replied, his tone subdued. "I came to see the new exhibit. It's beautiful in here," she tried, forcing a smile, though her heart felt heavy with the weight of unsaid words. Thanks, he murmured, and for a moment they stood in an awkward silence. The vibrant energy of the gallery felt miles away. Sarah finally asked, her voice steady. He hesitated, glancing toward a group of people admiring a large painting. That stung. Yes, it is, she replied, determination rising within her. With a deep breath, Daniel nodded and hesitantly led her to a quieter corner where the walls echoed their footsteps. The air felt charged, electric with tension. He began, rubbing the back of his neck. I didn't mean to shut you out. Sarah interrupted softly. That you could hide this from me forever. The past is complicated, Sarah. He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. It's not just my story, it's a lot of pain and disappointment. But I want to be part of your life, Daniel, she exclaimed, her voice rising slightly. You can't keep pushing me away. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then finally his shoulders sagged as if the weight of the world pressed down on him. Okay, he said quietly. As they stood close, Sarah could sense the storm inside him. She wanted to reach out, to chase away the shadows that haunted him. I'm willing to try, she replied, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. Finally, he began to share his story. It started with a passion for art, something I believed could change the world. I poured everything into that fair, but when the accusations came, everything crumbled. Friends turned their backs and the town turned against me. His voice grew quieter, heavier, and she felt the pain rolling off him like waves in a storm. Every day I faced people who once celebrated me, and now they just saw failure. As he spoke, she felt an intense mixture of empathy and anger. Anger at the people who had turned against him, and at the circumstances that had pushed him into this dark corner. But more than that, she felt a burning desire to support him through it all. She reached out and placed a comforting hand on his arm. You're not defined by your past. Her words seemed to pierce through his fog of despair, if only slightly. Daniel looked at her, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He asked, hope flickering in his gaze. I know so, she insisted, her heart soaring. You have talent, and that's what matters. Slowly, a flicker of a smile appeared on his face, and she felt a warmth spreading in the chilly gallery air. You're the only person who said that to me in a long time, he admitted softly. And now you're facing it head-on, she replied, her voice steadied by his resolve. You've already taken the first step. In that moment, the world outside faded away. The doubts and whispers that had haunted him began to dissolve in the face of support and connection. It was a chance at redemption, a leap into the unknown, but he didn't feel alone anymore. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Sarah and Daniel built something beautiful between them. They spent hour after hour exploring galleries, sharing deep conversations, and revisiting the places where art had once inspired both of them. With each brushstroke Daniel placed on a canvas, his fears began to unravel like a tightly wound thread. Sarah stood beside him, her unwavering support guiding him through the storms. She watched him blossom, his passion reigniting a fire that had once flickered low now roared back with purpose. And while the whispers from the past still lingered, they became a distant echo overshadowed by the new rhythm of their lives. It was a journey of resilience and understanding, a testament to the power of vulnerability and trust. Together, they confronted the shadows that loomed over Daniel's past, determined to redefine their future. Through every challenge, they discovered hope, each other's strength, and a love that emerged from the ashes. And in the moments where doubt threatened to creep in, Sarah would remind him gently, you're not defined by what happened. In that small town where life sometimes felt predictable, they learned to paint their own story. Each stroke on the canvas of their lives was filled with color, emotion, and purpose. A chance encounter had transformed into a beautiful journey worth exploring, one that neither of them would have chosen to face alone. And as they stood together, shoulder to shoulder, with the vibrant colors of their dreams in front of them, Daniel realized something profound. He had once been afraid of the truth, but now, with Sarah by his side, he discovered the beauty of vulnerability and the strength that came from facing his past head-on. Together, they were carving out a path that was uniquely theirs, each day a new canvas waiting to be filled with the story they were only beginning to tell. The air was electric, filled with the hum of excitement and the rich scent of coffee wafting through the cafe. Sarah had been nervously rehearsing what she was about to say in her head for days. She had finally decided to make her move. Sitting across from Daniel, she took a deep breath. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, seemed to pierce through her uncertainty. She asked, watching his expression carefully. This was her moment, the invitation she had been gearing up to offer. Yet before she could fully grasp the moment, he shook his head. I can't, he replied, his voice steady yet tinged with something she couldn't quite place. She felt a mix of confusion and disappointment wash over her. Is it a scheduling thing? Because he cut her off, his gaze drifting to the window. The words hung between them, heavy like fog. He wasn't giving her much to work with. She could feel the distance almost physically growing with each passing second. The cafe buzzed around them, but in that moment, all she could hear was her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. She pressed, fighting for clarity. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at her. It's complicated, he said. His jaw tightened, and she could sense an internal struggle churning inside him. A million thoughts raced through her mind. What did he mean by complicated? Did he not like art? Did he not want to spend time with her? Each question felt sharper than the last. It felt like he was shutting her out and she didn't understand why. He offered an apologetic glance, then stood abruptly. "I have to go," he said, leaving her sitting in the noise of the cafe, swallowed by disappointment. As Sarah took a sip of her now cold coffee, her mind whirled. Part of her wanted to just forget about him, but another part felt a magnetic pull, a need to understand. The mixture of emotions ignited her curiosity, like a match lighting a fire. That night, the lingering flicker of confusion pushed her to type his name into her laptop. The search results flooded her screen, each new link drawing her deeper into a world she had no idea existed. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There were posts from his social media, some art show announcements, and then she stumbled upon an article, a police report from 2 years ago. Her breath caught in her throat as she clicked it open. The headline alone sent a shudder through her. The article detailed how, during a community art show, funds had mysteriously vanished, and all eyes turned to Daniel, the very man who had opened up to her about his passion for art. As she read on, her heart sank lower and lower. Friends had turned against him. The community, which once praised his talent, had painted him a villain. She felt sick to her stomach, reeling from the harsh reality. Every connection they shared, every laugh they exchanged felt tainted now. A darkness crept in where light had once flourished. So many questions raced through her mind. Did he think she wouldn't understand? She didn't care about his past. She cared about who he was now. She spent hours lost in the depths of the internet, scrolling through comments, articles, and forum posts. "What a shame," one said. The weight of those words settled on her heart, heavy and suffocating. Feeling overwhelmed, she closed her laptop. Half of her wanted to walk away, this seemed so complicated. But the other half, the part that had felt so alive around him, was too curious to let go. What happened to the man in front of her? The emotional spark that pulled her in couldn't just vanish overnight. The next day, a surge of determination pushed her back to the cafe. She needed to face him, to ask the questions that hung like a cloud over their brief connection. As she entered, the aroma of brewed coffee filled her senses, but her focus was solely on one person, Daniel. He was sitting in the corner, sketching in a notepad, seemingly lost in his own world. "Hey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, eyes widening in surprise and maybe even guilt. "Sarah," he replied, a mix of warmth and apprehension in his tone. "I came to talk to you," she said firmly, taking a seat across from him. His expression shifted, guarded yet curious. "Complicated is not a reason," she shot back, her emotions bubbling to the surface. "I googled your name." Daniel flinched, pulling his sketchbook closer as if to shield himself. She asked, genuine confusion spilling out in her voice. "I would have understood." He ran hand through his hair, clearly wrestling with his feelings. "Because it's embarrassing," he admitted, gaze dropping. "Had hopes, dreams, and they all crumbled. People I cared about turned their backs. When I saw you, I thought," she pressed. He looked up, eyes wide, a flicker of hope and fear mixing. "Yeah," he finally confessed, "I didn't know how to deal with it." Feeling her heart ache for him, Sarah leaned in. "But you're not living in that shadow anymore. You have the chance to move forward." He leaned back, arms crossed defensively. She countered, her voice trembling with emotion. "What if this time is different?" Silence enveloped them, thick and charged. Daniel looked out the window, lost in thought. The cafe buzzed around them, but all that mattered was the space they occupied. She could see the struggle in his eyes, the internal battle between fear and the flicker of hope she had ignited. "Sarah, I appreciate your support, but nothing," she interrupted, her heart pounding in her chest. "You can't run away from your past forever, you need to face it." His gaze finally met hers, and for the first time she saw vulnerability mixed with desire. He asked. "I do," she affirmed, pouring every ounce of conviction into her words. Something shifted in Daniel's expression. The defenses that had once cloaked him began to crumble. It was a moment of clarity, and Sarah could feel the walls slowly coming down. Maybe I can try," he said finally, the hint of a smile beginning to form on his lips. "Let's start small," she suggested, her excitement bubbling up again. "Why not take the plunge and showcase some of your work?" "I could never face those people," he muttered, almost to himself. "Why not? It's part of your journey." "You're not the only one who can relate to falling down and getting back up," she answered, her heart racing. "You could inspire others." His expression softened, contemplating her words. "I know you can," she insisted. As the minutes ticked away, something beautiful began to blossom between them, a shared dream of redemption and hope. Daniel's fear began to melt away in the warmth of her belief. Little by little, they started crafting a plan. Weeks flew by, each meeting electrifying and filled with unyielding determination. They spent evenings working on his art, brainstorming ideas for a community show. Sarah rejoiced in Daniel's artistry, drawing inspiration from every brushstroke he laid onto the canvas. The day of the exhibit finally arrived. The same community that had once turned its back on him now opened its doors wide in anticipation. Sarah stood next to him, her heart racing with excitement and anxiety. He asked, glancing at her nervously. "They will," she replied confidently, squeezing his hand. As the crowd poured in, she watched the skepticism transform into awe. People moved from piece to piece, whispering compliments as they absorbed his talent. Daniel beamed as he watched the community reconnect with him through his art, and in that moment it felt as if everything clicked. The pieces of their pasts, the shadows and scars, slowly receded into the background, replaced by a shared journey of healing and triumph. When a familiar face appeared in the crowd, Sarah's breath caught. It was one of Daniel's former friends, the one who had been particularly vocal about the allegations. The man's gaze flickered between Daniel's art and the artist himself, uncertainty written all over his face. He called, hesitantly approaching. In that instant, Sarah could feel Daniel's pulse quickening. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Daniel replied, his voice steady although it trembled slightly. "Your work is incredible," his friend said, a hint of admiration breaking through his earlier apprehensions. "I had no idea how talented you were." Daniel nodded slowly, the spark of confrontation and understanding dancing in his eyes. "Thank you." The man extended a hand. Swallowing hard, Daniel took his hand, and in that singular moment, bridges began to rebuild. And as they talked, Sarah felt a warmth radiate through her, knowing that every ounce of support had been worthwhile. As the night closed with laughter and old bonds rekindled, Sarah couldn't shake off the joy swelling inside her chest. They had faced the past together, and while shadows might linger, the light was stronger. In that small town where everything felt familiar, Sarah and Daniel had rewritten their stories. What began with a hesitant invitation transformed into a powerful narrative of love, resilience, and redemption. Together, they were forging a new path, one that embraced every color, flaw, and shade of who they truly were. And in the quiet moments when doubt whispered, they held onto that undeniable truth. It was never too late to rise again. They had been given a second chance together. She stood there, heart racing, a tentative invitation on her lips. Sarah asked, her eyes bright with hope. Daniel looked up, surprise flickering in his hazel eyes, but just as quickly that spark faded. "I can't," he replied, his tone firm yet regretful. In that brief moment, as the bustling cafe faded around them, Sarah's heart plummeted. She had imagined this dinner as a face-to-face spark, an evening filled with laughter and the delightful potential of something more. Her voice was stronger than she felt, hiding the pang of disappointment clawing at her chest. "It's complicated," Daniel said, his gaze shifting to the window, where raindrops started to race down the glass. He seemed to withdraw into himself, as if her question had opened up a door to a painful past he wasn't ready to face. She pressed, a sense of urgency igniting in her. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I do," he replied, but there was a hesitance lurking in his voice, like a shadow creeping into their conversation. The abruptness of his departure left Sarah stunned, her mind racing as she watched him leave. Confusion settled into her bones. What had just happened? As she sat there, battling feelings of rejection and confusion, a surge of curiosity mixed with determination rose within her. There was something about Daniel that she needed to understand. What was so complicated that he couldn't even discuss it over dinner? That night, under the dim light of her kitchen, Sarah opened her laptop. The results filled the screen, a mix of social media profiles and local articles. She scrolled through them, a knot tightening in her stomach, and then she found it, an article that made her freeze. Her heart raced as she clicked on the link. The headline told a different story, dissecting a scandal that had enveloped her town months before. Accusations of embezzlement were detailed in black and white, painting Daniel as the villain, a man who had let everyone down. Sarah read every word as her world felt like it was crumbling. The accusations claimed he had mismanaged funds during an art festival, leading to chaos and lost trust in their community. Friends had turned against him, and gossip swirled like a storm. Her breath hitched. She had only seen the surface of him, but now it felt like she was looking through a broken window into a life filled with shadows. The article mentioned his once bright career as a talented artist, now marred by scandal. He ruined everything, someone had commented. Anger swirled inside Sarah, but more than that, it ignited a fierce protectiveness for him. She saw him as more than just a face in the crowd, more than the whispers that tainted his name. But why hadn't he told her? Why had he pushed her away? With each line, her determination grew. She needed to confront Daniel. She wanted answers, a chance to understand. The connection they had felt unique, special even, and she wasn't about to let it slip away without a fight. The next evening, Sarah returned to the cafe, her heart racing as she stepped inside. The familiar warmth and fragrance surrounded her. She spotted Daniel seated at a small table, tapping away on his laptop. Without hesitation, she approached him, determination tightening in her chest. She asked, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling up inside her. Daniel looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. Sure, he replied hesitantly. She began, sensing the urgency in her voice. "It's complicated," he said again, but this time she could hear the uncertainty beneath his words. Pressed, her heart pounding. "The truth is out there, I know what happened." A thick silence settled between them. His gaze fell to the table as if searching for answers woven into the wood grain. "I didn't want you to get involved in my mess," he finally admitted. She echoed, "You mean the article, Daniel, that doesn't define who you are." He shook his head, frustration creeping into his features. "No, you don't understand. This isn't just about a mistake," she interrupted, her emotions spilling over. With a resigned sigh, Daniel met her gaze. You think you see someone who just made a mistake, but I lost everything: friends, trust, respect. I thought I had a future here. Sarah could see the pain etched into his face, the vulnerability in his eyes. She pressed gently. His expression softened, the hardness in his eyes beginning to break. Because I'm scared, she urged. That I'll run away, that I'll judge you. I'm here, Daniel. I can't promise I'm a sure thing, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Most things worth having don't come from being sure, she said passionately. They come from taking leaps, from going after what we want. You've been living in shadow for too long. For a moment, Daniel looked like he was considering it. The tension in the air shifted, like clouds parting to reveal a blue sky. Maybe you're right, he admitted, his defenses lowering, if only slightly, but I need time. Then let's figure it out together, she suggested. Let's start with something small. How about you share your art? He hesitated yet again, doubt swirling again in his eyes. She countered, passion rising within her. Daniel studied her, and for a moment they both held their breath. The world outside moved on, but in their small bubble, time felt suspended. Okay, he finally said, a tentative smile creeping onto his face. As they talked more throughout the evening, Sarah felt a warmth blossom in her chest. There was potential here, a future that seemed brighter now. Each word exchanged was a step toward breaking down the walls he had built around himself. In the following weeks, they spent countless hours together. Daniel would sketch, and Sarah encouraged him to showcase his work, igniting a fire in him that had lain dormant for far too long. He began to share his thoughts, his fears, and the stories behind each piece of art. It wasn't easy. His past loomed like a shadow, always somewhere in their conversations. Sarah stood by him through it all, unwavering. You are worthy of your dreams, Daniel, she reminded him often. You have a voice. Slowly, the raw energy began to flow back into his work. One rainy afternoon, while covered in paint at her apartment, he broke the silence. Maybe we could do a small showcase, he suggested, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Sarah asked, her excitement leaping. I mean, a local display, just a few friends, maybe family. A chance to put my work out there without the pressure of the whole town watching, he said, his hands shaking slightly. She exclaimed, throwing her arms around him in a hug. As the day approached, nervous energy filled the air. They crafted flyers, invited some close friends, and even set up decorations to make the space feel inviting. All the while, Daniel battled feelings of doubt and trepidation. He fretted one evening, staring at his sketches laid out before them. She countered, lifting his chin so their eyes met. They came here to see you, to connect with you as an artist. On the night of the showcase, Sarah wore a simple dress that made her feel confident. The little art space they had chosen was vibrant with energy, and as people flowed in, Daniel stood at the entrance, his hands fidgeting by his side. Deep breaths, Sarah whispered, offering her hand as they prepared for the onslaught of voices. When the first guest approached, Sarah felt Daniel tense beside her. The person said, stopping in front of one of his paintings. The floodgates opened as more people wandered in, commenting on his work. Laughter filled the air as they reminisced about old memories, and Sarah could see the joy returning to Daniel's face. The weight of the past began to lift, but then one familiar face appeared, Daniel's former friend, the one who had once spread the rumors. Anxiety clenched Daniel's stomach as the man approached. Daniel, he said, the tension palpable. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how things went down. For a heartbeat, Daniel stood frozen, then he nodded slowly, allowing himself to breathe. Thank you. They engaged in tentative conversation, and Sarah could see the walls Daniel had built begin to crack. With each moment, he reclaimed a piece of his identity, adding vibrance back to his canvas of life. Hours passed, laughter mixed with stories, and the air was filled with hope. At the end of the night, Sarah stepped back and watched Daniel engage, a brilliant smile lighting up his face. He was shining, a man reborn in front of her eyes, wrapped in acceptance. Days turned into weeks, and each step they took solidified the bond they had forged. The community began to embrace him again, slowly reclaiming the trust that had once been lost. Daniel found joy in his art, and Sarah realized that what had started as a simple invitation had blossomed into something extraordinary. As their relationship deepened, Sarah found herself falling for him in ways she never expected. Daniel had learned to let people in again, and in doing so, he revealed the sweetest, most vulnerable parts of his soul. One evening, while watching the sunset, Daniel turned to her, his eyes filled with warmth and sincerity. I didn't believe I could have this again, Sarah. Tears pricked at her eyes as she grasped his hand. You did this, Daniel. You took the first step. You allowed yourself to be vulnerable. He smiled, a beautiful image she wanted to lock away forever. Best decision you ever made, she teased, wiping a tear from her cheek. In that moment, beneath the vibrant colors of the sunset, the past no longer mattered. They were built anew, each canvas blank and filled with potential. Together, they created a masterpiece that was uniquely theirs, defined not by failures, but by the courage to embrace the unknown and the beauty of second chances. She stood there, heart racing, a tentative invitation on her lips. Sarah asked, her eyes bright with hope. Daniel looked up, surprise flickering in his hazel eyes, but just as quickly that spark faded. I can't, he replied, his tone firm yet regretful. In that brief moment, as the bustling cafe faded around them, Sarah's heart plummeted. She had imagined this dinner as a face-to-face spark, an evening filled with laughter and the delightful potential of something more. Her voice was stronger than she felt, hiding the pang of disappointment clawing at her chest. "It's complicated," Daniel said, his gaze shifting to the window, where raindrops started to race down the glass. He seemed to withdraw into himself, as if her question had opened a door to a painful past he wasn't ready to face. She pressed, a sense of urgency igniting in her. The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I do," he replied, but there was a hesitance lurking in his voice, like a shadow creeping into their conversation. The abruptness of his departure left Sarah stunned, her mind racing as she watched him leave. Confusion settled into her bones. What had just happened? As she sat there, battling feelings of rejection and confusion, a surge of curiosity mixed with determination rose within her. There was something about Daniel that she needed to understand. What was so complicated that he couldn't even discuss it over dinner? That night, under the dim light of her kitchen, Sarah opened her laptop. The results filled the screen, a mix of social media profiles and local articles. She scrolled through them, a knot tightening in her stomach, and then she found it. An article that made her freeze. Her heart raced as she clicked on the link. The headline told a different story, dissecting a scandal that had enveloped her town months before. Accusations of embezzlement were detailed in black and white, painting Daniel as the villain, a man who had let everyone down. Sarah read every word as her world felt like it was crumbling. The accusations claimed he had mismanaged funds during an art festival, leading to chaos and lost trust in their community. Friends had turned against him and gossip swirled like a storm. Her breath hitched. She had only seen the surface of him, but now it felt like she was looking through a broken window into a life filled with shadows. The article mentioned his once bright career as a talented artist, now marred by scandal. "He ruined everything," someone had commented. Anger swirled inside Sarah, but more than that, it ignited a fierce protectiveness for him. She saw him as more than just a face in the crowd, more than the whispers that tainted his name. But why hadn't he told her? Why had he pushed her away? With each line, her determination grew. She needed to confront Daniel. She wanted answers, a chance to understand. The connection they had felt unique, special even, and she wasn't about to let it slip away without a fight. The next evening, Sarah returned to the cafe, her heart racing as she stepped inside. The familiar warmth and fragrance surrounded her. She spotted Daniel seated at a small table, tapping away on his laptop. Without hesitation, she approached him, determination tightening in her chest. She asked, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling up inside her. Daniel looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Sure," he replied hesitantly. She began, sensing the urgency in her voice. "It's complicated," he said again, but this time she could hear the uncertainty beneath his words. Pressed, her heart pounding. "The truth is out there, I know what happened." A thick silence settled between them. His gaze fell to the table as if searching for answers woven into the wood grain. "I didn't want you to get involved in my mess," he finally admitted. She echoed, "You mean the article, Daniel, that doesn't define who you are." He shook his head, frustration creeping into his features. "No, you don't understand. This isn't just about a mistake," she interrupted, her emotions spilling over. With a resigned sigh, Daniel met her gaze. "You think you see someone who just made a mistake, but I lost everything: friends, trust, respect. I thought I had a future here." Sarah could see the pain etched into his face, the vulnerability in his eyes. She pressed gently. His expression softened, the hardness in his eyes beginning to break. "Because I'm scared." She urged, "That I'll run away, that I'll judge you. I'm here, Daniel. I can't promise I'm a sure thing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Most things worth having don't come from being sure," she said passionately. "They come from taking leaps, from going after what we want. You've been living in shadow for too long." For a moment, Daniel looked like he was considering it. The tension in the air shifted, like clouds parting to reveal a blue sky. "Maybe you're right," he admitted, his defenses lowering, if only slightly. "But I need time." "Then let's figure it out together," she suggested. "Let's start with something small. How about you share your art?" He hesitated yet again, doubt swirling again in his eyes. She countered, passion rising within her. Daniel studied her, and for a moment they both held their breath. The world outside moved on, but in their small bubble, time felt suspended. "Okay," he finally said, a tentative smile creeping onto his face. As they talked more throughout the evening, Sarah felt a warmth blossom in her chest. There was potential here, a future that seemed brighter now. Each word exchanged was a step toward breaking down the walls he had built around himself. In the following weeks, they spent countless hours together. Daniel would sketch, and Sarah encouraged him to showcase his work, igniting a fire in him that had lain dormant for far too long. He began to share his thoughts, his fears, and the stories behind each piece of art. It wasn't easy. His past loomed like a shadow, always somewhere in their conversations. Sarah stood by him through it all, unwavering. "You are worthy of your dreams, Daniel," she reminded him often. "You have a voice." Slowly, the raw energy began to flow back into his work. One rainy afternoon, while covered in paint at her apartment, he broke the silence. "Maybe we could do a small showcase," he suggested, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Sarah asked, her excitement leaping. I mean, a local display, just a few friends, maybe family. A chance to put my work out there without the pressure of the whole town watching, he said, his hands shaking slightly. She exclaimed, throwing her arms around him in a hug. As the day approached, nervous energy filled the air. They crafted flyers, invited some close friends, and even set up decorations to make the space feel inviting. All the while, Daniel battled feelings of doubt and trepidation. He fretted one evening, staring at his sketches laid out before them. She countered, lifting his chin so their eyes met. They came here to see you, to connect with you as an artist. On the night of the showcase, Sarah wore a simple dress that made her feel confident. The little art space they had chosen was vibrant with energy, and as people flowed in, Daniel stood at the entrance, his hands fidgeting by his side. Deep breaths, Sarah whispered, offering her hand as they prepared for the onslaught of voices. When the first guest approached, Sarah felt Daniel tense beside her. The person said, stopping in front of one of his paintings. The floodgates opened as more people wandered in, commenting on his work. Laughter filled the air as they reminisced about old memories, and Sarah could see the joy returning to Daniel's face. The weight of the past began to lift, but then one familiar face appeared, Daniel's former friend, the one who had once spread the rumors. Anxiety clenched Daniel's stomach as the man approached. Daniel, he said, the tension palpable. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how things went down. For a heartbeat, Daniel stood frozen, then he nodded slowly, allowing himself to breathe. Thank you. They engaged in tentative conversation, and Sarah could see the walls Daniel had built begin to crack. With each moment, he reclaimed a piece of his identity, adding vibrance back to his canvas of life. Hours passed, laughter mixed with stories, and the air was filled with hope. At the end of the night, Sarah stepped back and watched Daniel engage, a brilliant smile lighting up his face. He was shining, a man reborn in front of her eyes, wrapped in acceptance. Days turned into weeks, and each step they took solidified the bond they had forged. The community began to embrace him again, slowly reclaiming the trust that had once been lost. Daniel found joy in his art, and Sarah realized that what had started as a simple invitation had blossomed into something extraordinary. As their relationship deepened, Sarah found herself falling for him in ways she never expected. Daniel had learned to let people in again, and in doing so, he revealed the sweetest, most vulnerable parts of his soul. One evening, while watching the sunset, Daniel turned to her, his eyes filled with warmth and sincerity. I didn't believe I could have this again, Sarah. Tears pricked at her eyes as she grasped his hand. You did this, Daniel. You took the first step. You allowed yourself to be vulnerable. He smiled, a beautiful image she wanted to lock away forever. Best decision you ever made, she teased, wiping a tear from her cheek. In that moment, beneath the vibrant colors of the sunset, the past no longer mattered. They were built anew, each canvas blank and filled with potential. Together, they created a masterpiece that was uniquely theirs, defined not by failures, but by the courage to embrace the unknown and the beauty of second chances. And as they stood hand in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, both knew they had learned the truth. Sometimes the shadows lead the way to the light. She stood on the sidewalk, rain drizzling around her like an unwelcome curtain, heart pounding in her chest. All morning, Sarah had rehearsed this moment, envisioned the spark of connection that would light up between them. With a deep breath, she approached Daniel. They had shared a few moments here and there, their conversations always lingering in her mind like sweet candy. But this felt different. Today was bigger. She called out, her voice bright despite the gloom overhead. He looked up startled, but his face quickly transformed into a warm smile that made her stomach flip. Hey there, Sarah, she blurted out before second-guessing herself. There it was, the invitation hanging in the air between them. For a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. Then she watched as his expression shifted. Confusion knitted his brow and the light in his eyes dimmed. I can't, he said, gaze drifting away, avoiding hers. She echoed, feeling a tight knot form in her stomach. It's complicated, he replied, voice flat as if that covered everything. She repeated, frustration bubbling just below the surface. Can't you just, Sarah, really? I can't explain right now, he interrupted, shaking his head as if trying to shake her off. There was a distant quality in his tone, a barrier that felt insurmountable. Okay, she managed, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The rejection stung, but she wrapped it in a layer of confusion. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the haze of the city. Standing alone on the sidewalk, Sarah felt the familiar thrum of disappointment. It mixed with an unshakable curiosity. What did he mean by complicated? The moment gnawed at her. She felt like she had stumbled into a riddle without a key. That night, as her mind raced with questions, she took a plunge. What she found sent her heart plummeting. Articles scrolled before her, each painted a picture of someone she thought she knew. The headline jumped out, heavy and accusatory. She clicked on the link, and the words blurred together as her heart raced. Daniel, the warm artist with the easy smile, had been caught in a web of deceit, accused of misusing funds during a community art exhibit. Her stomach dropped as the article delved into details of betrayal and shattered trust. People were furious. One comment read, the snippets of actual quotes from community members echoed in her mind, hitting like stones thrown at a glass house. How could this be the same man who smiled at her, who seemed so genuine? It was more than just the scandal. It was the loss of integrity, community, and friendship. It stung more than she expected. She had felt the connection blooming, and now it felt tainted by this unwanted knowledge. Days passed, and despite the chaos in her mind, she couldn't shake him off. The desire to understand outweighed the fear of confronting the truth. There was something about the way he had gazed at her, the way his smile had lit her days. She needed to find out who Daniel truly was beneath the layers of shame and accusations. By the end of the week, a determination bubbled within her. She decided to confront him. With purpose, Sarah made her way to the cafe they had met in before, hope threading through her anxiety. As she stepped inside, the comforting warmth wrapped around her, but her heart raced at the thought of facing him. She scanned the room until she found him sitting in the corner with his head down, scribbling on a sketchpad. "Daniel," she called, approaching slowly. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something more guarded. "Hey, Sarah," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She asked, her voice steady despite the churn in her stomach. He echoed, uncertainty cracking through his demeanor. "Yes, what's been happening?" she said, gesturing vaguely. His expression shifted, hardening slightly. "And I found some articles," she continued, pushing forward. "You don't have to hide from me, Daniel." For a moment, silence enveloped them like a heavy blanket. His fingers drummed nervously against the table as he processed her words. "It's not something I'm proud of," he finally said, looking away. "But I need to know why you said no to dinner," she pressed, leaning closer, desperate for clarity. "Because it's shameful." "I'm ashamed of what I did," he admitted, his voice low. The words landed heavy between them. Feeling a surge of empathy mixed with frustration, Sarah took a deep breath. "You made a mistake. You're not a bad person. Why are you afraid of me?" His gaze met hers, vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "I'm not everyone," she shot back gently. "I see something in you, Daniel. What if I fail again?" he murmured, a tremor creeping into his voice. "There's no success without risk," she replied, feeling her determination sharpen. "We've all had moments that define us, but they don't need to destroy us. You're still here. You're still creating." He shook his head and looked away, as if willing her words to evaporate. "Then help me understand," she pleaded, leaning in. His features softened slightly. "Then rewrite it," she whispered, locking eyes with him. Their conversation that day marked a turning point. It began to peel back the layers Daniel had built around himself. The more they talked, the more Sarah could see glimpses of the man she had been drawn to, the artist with visions, ideas, and even a flicker of hope buried deep within the bravado. Over the following weeks, they worked together, Daniel with his sketches and Sarah encouraging him to put his art out there, to reclaim his identity. Each conversation sparked more ideas, more dreams that had lain dormant for so long. Yet despite their growing connection, threads of uncertainty still lingered for him. He hesitated at every turn, afraid of what might happen if he stumbled again. Each time Sarah reached out, she could feel the walls closing back in. "One day I'll just prove you wrong," he voiced one evening, frustration clouding his brow. The air between them felt tense, charged. "Stop that." "You're not a waste of anything," she snapped, anger bubbling up momentarily. "You have to fight for what matters." "I don't even know how to do that," he muttered, shoulders slumped. "We'll figure it out together," she insisted. "But first, you need to forgive yourself." As spring turned into summer, they started planning a small exhibition for his art, a way to showcase his work to trusted friends and family, where he wouldn't be judged by the past, but celebrated for who he was now. When the day finally arrived, the small, local gallery buzzed with a nervous energy. Sarah could see Daniel from across the room, pacing as if every footfall counted. She approached him, her heart swelling with pride. "Hey," she asked softly. "Ready? I'm terrified," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Good, then you're human," she smiled, squeezing his arm. As people began trickling in, Daniel's nerves started to ease. Laughter filled the air as friends reminisced and admired the art displayed on the walls. Bit by bit, he began to emerge from his shell, sharing stories about each piece and connecting with those who came to support him. But then she spotted a familiar face in the corner. Daniel's former friend, the one who had been so vocal about the allegations. A wave of panic surged through Sarah as she watched the man inch closer to Daniel. "Sarah," Daniel whispered, eyes wide as he caught the sight of him. She placed her hand on his arm reassuringly. "This is your moment." Taking a deep breath, Daniel squared his shoulders and walked toward the man, who stood stiffly with confusion written across his face. Sarah held her breath, watching as they exchanged words that seemed tentative yet charged with years of unresolved tension. "Hey, Daniel," his friend said finally. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how everything went down. I didn't have all the facts back then." "Thank you," Daniel replied softly, his expression contemplative. "It's hard to believe friends could turn so quickly." "So?" the man asked, clearly uncertain. "I'm trying to create from a different place, a more honest one. I hope you might see that," he offered, the flicker of hope returning to his expression. Sarah watched, heart pounding, as something incredible began to unfold. The shadows of the past were peeling back. Daniel was rewriting his story, and the community was there to embrace it. As the evening continued, she felt a warm sense of pride wrap around her. People laughed, stories flowed, and art transformed the space into something magical. Daniel thrived under admiration, his passion igniting in response to every compliment. Days turned into weeks, and the exhibition marked the beginning of a new chapter. They worked collaboratively, Sarah often helping to promote Daniel's art. She watched in awe as little by little the community accepted him again. But somewhere along the way, something began to change. The connection that had sparked between them evolved into something deeper, more profound. Late-night conversations turned into shared dreams and hopes for the future. Sarah found herself watching him with growing fondness, her heart warming to the man he was becoming. One evening, under a sky painted in soft pastels as the sun dipped below the horizon, she turned to him, feeling vulnerable yet hopeful. "You know, I've been thinking about us, Daniel." "Neither did I," he admitted, an unreadable look in his eyes. "But I want to explore this, what we have," she said, heart racing. A moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Then he stepped closer, eyes searching hers. "Then we worked through it together. You're so much more than your past." "You're an artist, a friend, and someone I care about deeply," she replied, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions. Daniel's expression softened, the corners of his mouth lifting in a shy smile. "I can't believe I found you through all this chaos," he said, his voice tender. And just like that, the walls they had both built began to crumble. They shared a tentative kiss, sealing a deeper bond forged through challenge and unwavering support. As they stood beneath the fading light, surrounded by a world alive with possibilities, they realized that this journey they had embarked upon felt like a masterpiece in itself, crafted from vulnerability, resilience, and an unbreakable connection. In that moment, they knew they had rewritten their stories. It wasn't just Daniel overcoming his past, it was them both embracing the beauty of second chances, stepping boldly into a future that was theirs to create. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the world in vivid colors, they held onto the truth. Between the shadows and the light, they had found hope, and in each other they had planted the seeds for something extraordinary. They were ready to embrace it all. Rain danced against the cafe windows as Sarah nervously tapped her fingers on the table. She had been waiting for this moment, a sliver of hope blooming in her chest. Daniel, the man who sparked her interest with his quiet confidence and mysterious aura, sat just across from her. She glanced at him, his brows drawn in concentration over the cafe's special of the day. "Daniel," she began, her voice wavering slightly, "would you like to go to the art exhibit this weekend?" His gaze flicked up to hers, and for a moment she saw a spark of something flicker across his face, surprise, maybe even eagerness. But then it vanished, leaving an empty stillness in its place. "I can't," he said, shaking his head ever so slightly. A cool distance crept in. She echoed, confusion knitting her brow. "What do you mean it's just an art show?" "I just can't, okay, it's complicated," he replied, avoiding her eyes, his focus growing distant. Sarah's heart sank, the initial excitement twisted into disappointment. The words slipped out before she could reel them back, but Daniel simply looked away, frustration and something deeper flickering in his eyes. The warmth that had lit the air around them retreated like a tide pulling back from the shore. "I have to go," he said, standing up so abruptly that the chair scraped against the floor. In a blink, he was gone, leaving her sitting in the cafe, the laughter and chatter of other patrons echoing in her ears like a cruel reminder of her moment lost. The rain intensified outside, matching the tumult of emotions swirling inside her. How could he just shut her out like that? She felt the impulse to chase after him, to demand answers, but something held her back. Instead, she took a deep breath and downed the rest of her coffee, bitter and lukewarm, just like the reality of her situation. That night, unable to push the encounter from her mind, she opened her laptop, an unsettling curiosity gnawing at her. She typed his name into the search bar, and as the results appeared, her heart raced. What could she uncover? The first few links were innocuous enough, his social media profiles, a few mentions and local events, all blending into a comfortable facade. Her breath caught in her throat as she clicked on it, the screen illuminating her face with harsh, cold light. The article detailed a shocking narrative. Daniel had been accused of financial mismanagement during an art fair, a beloved event in their close-knit community. Her stomach twisted as she read about the chaos that had erupted. Friends turned against him, trust shattered among local artists, whispers of betrayal echoing through the town. The words splashed darkly across the page, more vivid than she had ever imagined. "He let us all down," one person was quoted as saying. And there it was, every hope she had felt, every smirk and playful banter, all clouded by this shadow. She spent hours poring over the article, feeling sick as the truth unfolded. Daniel, the man she had shared fleeting moments with, was not just an artist, but a man whose reputation hung by a thread, ripped apart by scandal. Anger seethed inside her, not at him, but at the injustices he faced. Why hadn't he told her? Did he think she would judge him? The anger twisted into determination. She couldn't walk away without confronting him about it. The connection she felt was too real to ignore, and she needed answers. Over the next few days, the feeling wouldn't leave her. Work felt mundane, her mind wandering back to the mysterious man whom she could hardly understand. She found herself back at the cafe, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. As if on cue, she spotted Daniel sitting in the same spot, sketchbook open but his eyes lost in the distance like a man trapped in a fog. "Daniel," she called, her heart hammering, forcing herself to be brave. He looked up and for a moment she thought she saw relief wash over his features. His voice was warm, but the flicker of anxiety behind his eyes made her stomach twist again. She requested, her voice steady despite the tumult within. He asked, looking hesitant, "About your past, about what happened, I know," she said, keeping her gaze firm upon him. Daniel's expression shifted, shadows sliding back into place as he leaned back in his chair, walls growing around him once more. "I know about the article," she replied, her pulse racing. "I know you're facing a lot." His eyes darkened and she could see the struggle within him. "It's not that simple," he finally said, voice low. "Then help me understand," she insisted, leaning a little closer. "Don't shut me out." He fell silent, staring down at his sketchbook as if it held the answers. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he said slowly. Sarah pressed gently, keen to dig deeper through the fog. He took a long, deep breath, finally meeting her gaze. "I wanted to create something beautiful. I poured everything I had into that art show. The excitement of it all consumed me, and when the money went missing, I was declared guilty before I had a chance to explain." As he spoke, Sarah felt the weight of his pain, a deep sorrow that echoed her own heartbreak. "But you're not alone now," she said, her voice gentle but resolute. He snorted, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "With what?" "Not everyone can forget what happened, but you have to try," she urged, her eyes locking with his. "So easy for you to say," he muttered, looking away. "True," she acknowledged, "but we're all human and we all make mistakes." Daniel seemed to wrestle with her words. Finally, he let out a defeated sigh. "Start by sharing your art," she suggested softly. "Put your heart back into what you love. Show them who you really are. You're a talented artist." Daniel fell silent again, his gaze unfocused as he lost himself in thought. The cafe buzzed around them, but they existed in their own world, a fragile space cradling their hopes and fears. After a moment, he murmured, I've thought about doing a small showcase." "Then do it," she encouraged, a burst of excitement swelling within her. "Let's set it up just friends and a few supportive people." "Okay, I can think about that," he said slowly, the beginnings of an idea igniting in his eyes. As they moved into the following weeks, something shifted between them. Each moment spent working together drew them closer, their conversations becoming deeper, more intimate. Their pasts began to intertwine, both of them sharing dreams, fears, and vulnerabilities that had been hidden for too long. They planned together, organized details for his showcase, crafted invitations, and with each step, Daniel seemed to emerge from the shadows. Sarah watched as the man who had once felt consumed by regret began to let light back into his life, but the road was not easy. The whispers of the past still haunted him, and she often saw moments of doubt creeping back into his heart. He would murmur, speaking more to himself than to her. She would counter, placing a hand on his shoulder gently. "You've got to push through." On the day of the showcase, they stood together, surrounded by friends and family, the walls of the small gallery adorned with Daniel's art. It was more than just paintings. It was a representation of resilience, courage, and a new beginning. Each piece carried his story, his struggles woven into the strokes. The gallery buzzed with anticipation, a hum of conversation and laughter filling the air. Sarah watched as Daniel stood near the entrance, shifting nervously from foot to foot, glancing around as familiar faces entered. A knot of pride swelled in her chest. He was here, facing it all. "Hey," she whispered, stepping beside him. "Take a breath." "Yeah, but what if they judge me?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I believe in you," she said firmly, giving his arm a reassuring squeeze. "Just show them your heart." Slowly the evening unfurled. As guests mingled, they approached Daniel, smiles on their faces, curiosity tinging the air. Feedback rolled in, drifting from one person to another. Someone exclaimed, standing in front of a painting. The first compliment broke the dam within Daniel, and as the night progressed, he began to open up. Laughter erupted, warmth blossomed, and for a moment the weight of the past faded, replaced by the vibrancy of the present. But then as the crowd swirled, a familiar face stepped in, a former friend from his past, the kind of person who had once turned away and whispered harsh words. The sudden tension hung in the air like fog. "Daniel," the man said, voice wavering, I didn't know you were having this." Feeling the tightness grip his chest, Daniel nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "Thank you," he spoke, his voice low. "I didn't know the full story before," the friend continued, eyes wide with regret. Daniel's stomach churned, but he forced himself to speak. "We all make mistakes." Watching this confrontation unfold, Sarah felt the swell of hope rise inside her. The acceptance, the willingness to move past hurt, this was what she had wanted for him. He was reclaiming his narrative one step at a time. As the evening wound down, Sarah caught Daniel's gaze, surrounded by an air of warmth. He stood taller, his confidence returning in waves. The laughter faded, replaced by heartfelt conversations echoing in their minds. He was beginning to redefine who he was, and she was proud to be beside him through it all. Weeks turned into months, and the showcases continued to increase in number. Through it all, Daniel blossomed, facing the music and allowing the community to embrace him again. Each piece he created was richer, deeper, filled with layers of emotion that spoke to the journey he had taken. Throughout the experience, a bond was forged that transcended the shared struggle. They discovered each other in unique ways, unraveling the walls built around their hearts. Night after night, they found themselves talking until sunrise, sharing dreams, aspirations, and fears. One quiet evening, as they sat beneath a blanket of stars, Sarah turned to Daniel. "You know, I think you've shown me so much about resilience." Daniel smiled softly, his eyes filled with warmth. "And you've given me the strength to fight." If it weren't for you, their fingers intertwined, and in that moment they both understood the beauty of second chances, the power of fighting for something worth having. It was a journey they had walked together, a shared experience that bound them deeper than words could express. Finally, as spring unfurled into summer, Sarah found herself looking towards the future with excitement rather than trepidation. Daniel had blossomed, and together they had created a path that gleamed with potential. On one beautiful morning, as the sun streamed through the window, Sarah turned to him, thoughts swirling. She asked, curiosity dancing in her eyes. "I want to keep creating," he replied, determination revitalizing his spirit. "I think you would be amazing at that," Sarah said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. Daniel smiled, a newfound light filling his gaze. They stood together, the world around them felt alive with possibilities. They would face whatever came next, hand in hand. With each moment spent diving into art, challenges, and triumphs, they had cultivated something beautiful from the ashes of the past. Sarah knew their journey was just beginning, and together they would paint their lives with resilience, love, and hope colors woven into a masterpiece uniquely theirs. In that warmth, they pledged to embrace life fully, to fight for dreams and redeem the past. They proved that every shadow could give way to light, and in their hearts they already knew they were ready for whatever came next. She stood under the flickering streetlight, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Sarah had never expected to feel this way about someone so quickly. The moment she met Daniel at that art exhibit, something clicked. He was different, intense, yet approachable, with an artist's soul that drew her in. But tonight was different. Tonight, she was going to take a chance. With a deep breath, she stepped closer to him, whose eyes scanned the street as he leaned against his car. She called out, hope igniting in her voice. He turned, a smile breaking across his face, a soft, welcoming smile that melted the worry away for a moment. "Hey, Sarah," the question came out quicker than she intended, her stomach twisting as she searched his face for a reaction, but that smile faltered. "Oh, I can't," he said, almost apologetically. She echoed, confusion rushing through her. "It's complicated," he replied, looking away, the warmth fading from his gaze. She pressed, frustration creeping into her voice. "Sarah, I need to go," he said, his tone more firm. She felt the distance stretch between them, and she could only watch as he slipped into his car, leaving her standing there in the dim light, feeling the chill of rejection. With her heart in her throat, she wrestled with the urge to chase after him, to figure out what was going on. Instead, she turned away, her mind spinning with confusion and disappointment. In a daze, she made her way home, but Daniel consumed her thoughts. Why had he said no? What did he mean by complicated? That night, she pulled out her laptop, driven by a surge of curiosity that wouldn't let go. She typed in Daniel Reed and hit enter. The search results flooded her screen. Her heart raced as her eyes darted through links, not knowing what to expect. At first, she found mundane listings, his social media pages, event notifications, even photographs of his art. With a mix of disbelief and dread, Sarah clicked on the article. Words spilled across the page, painting a picture she couldn't comprehend. Daniel had been accused of mismanaging funds during a local art fair, an event that had brought joy to the community but now bore the weight of betrayal. Her breath quickened as she read the details. Fury and disappointment poured from people who once celebrated him. "He deceived us," one person was quoted. The anger in those words cut deep. Sarah felt queasy as the pieces fell into place. The man who had so captivated her, whose laughter filled her heart with warmth, was also a man who had been painted in shades of disgrace. Confusion turned to determination. This wasn't the man she knew. What had happened to him? Why hadn't he said anything? Every moment they had shared now hung like a cruel joke, twisted by this new reality. She felt a surge of protective instinct for him. She wanted to understand, to reach out, but would he let her in? With a heavy heart, Sarah resolved to confront him. She couldn't walk away without trying to know the truth. The next day, she returned to the cafe where they had first met, anxiety roiling in her stomach. As she entered, the warm aroma of coffee surrounded her, but it was Daniel who occupied every thought. She scanned the room and finally spotted him tucked away in a corner, sketchbook balanced on his knees, lost in thought. "Hey, Daniel," she called out, strolling over, her breath catching at how handsome he looked in the morning light. He looked up, surprise fleeting across his features. "Sarah," he replied, then looked down at his sketch, a nervous energy surrounding him. She asked, determination threading through her voice. He said, hesitant, "About what happened, I want to understand," she said, her heart in her throat. He perked up, confusion playing on his features. "I know about the article, Daniel," she said, realizing that honesty was the only way forward. His face fell, and she could see the way his body tensed. "Didn't want you to find out that way," he admitted, a shadow crossing his gaze. "You could have told me," she urged, her heart pounding. "This matters to me." There was silence between them, the bustling cafe fading into nothingness. Finally, Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. It all started with good intentions. I wanted to organize something beautiful for the community, a showcase of local talent. She pressed, wanting to peel back the layers of hurt and misfortune. I overestimated everything. I got in over my head, and then things started to disappear. People trusted me and I let them down, he said, pain slicing through his tone. But you're not some villain, she countered, leaning closer. You made a mistake, because it's not just a mistake, he replied, a flicker of anguish in his voice. People lost faith in me, friends turned away. The statement was almost incredulous. You're worth fighting for, Daniel. Everyone makes mistakes. We're all human. I'm here. His expression broke slightly, vulnerability sneaking through. You don't know what you're getting into, he murmured. I know you're scared, she replied, agonizing over his turmoil, but you can't keep running away from this. Daniel's eyes locked with hers, searching for something, perhaps understanding, perhaps hope. Then you get up again, she insisted, her passion growing. You have to let go of what happened. If you take a step back, you'll miss out on life. There was a moment of silence, a tension hanging thick between them. Slowly, his shoulders began to relax ever so slightly, the hard lines of his face softening. I do, she said, her heart racing. Let's start small, share your art, show it to me. You have a gift, Daniel. He nodded slowly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes, but there was also a glimmer of something more, possibility. Maybe. She exclaimed, excitement bubbling within her. I'll help. As they began putting plans in motion, a sense of hope took hold. Days turned into weeks, and they immersed themselves in creativity. Sarah watched with wonder as the man who had felt so burdened slowly began to reclaim his passion for art. They spent hours sketching, sharing stories, experimenting with colors and shapes that reflected the journey they were both on, Sarah navigating her emotions about Daniel, and Daniel confronting the shadows of his past. But even through the laughter and creativity, doubt crept back into his mind. The memories of betrayal were often visible behind his eyes. He would worry, his voice tight. She countered, determined to lift him above his fears. You're not that person anymore. And so the night of the showcase arrived. The little gallery was filled with friends who immediately recognized the magic that surrounded Daniel's work. He stood nervously near the door, his expression a mix of hope and dread. Sarah watched him, trying to calm her own fluttering heart. Just be yourself, she reminded him softly, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. You've put your heart into this. As guests began to mingle, Daniel found himself lost in the ebb and flow of conversation. And when the first few people complimented his work, a glimmer of light filled his eyes. Someone marveled, studying a vibrant piece hanging on the wall. For the first time, Sarah saw him truly relax. Laughter filled the gallery and the air thrummed with excitement. Daniel engaged with each person, sharing the stories behind his work, allowing them to see the depth of what he had endured and how it had shaped him. But then she saw a familiar face among the crowd, a distant figure from his past. It was one of the people who had turned against him, whispering ugly words when the scandal broke. Tension tightened around them, and Sarah felt Daniel's body stiffen beside her. I can't face him, he murmured, anxiety creeping into his voice. Breathe, Daniel, you can do this, she said quietly, squeezing his hand for assurance. As his former friend approached, Daniel could only stand frozen. Hey, the man said, glancing around the gallery, his expression uncertain. I just wanted to say. For a moment, Daniel's thoughts tangled. Thank you, he finally replied, allowing himself to breathe a little easier. It hasn't been easy, I lost a lot of things. But rather than turning away, the man continued, something sincere in his eyes. I shouldn't have participated in the rumors. Daniel swallowed hard, the weight of acknowledgement heavy in the air. It's all right. As they engaged in tentative conversation, Sarah felt a tide of hope wash over her. It was another moment of healing, not just for Daniel, but for the man standing before him. The acceptance hung beautifully between them. The night proceeded, laughter and connection weaving through the air like a luxurious tapestry. Sarah stepped back, watching Daniel as he absorbed the atmosphere, joy illuminating his face. They were surrounded by people who celebrated him, who saw him for who he truly was, a passionate artist rising from the ashes. As the evening began to wind down, Daniel came to her, eyes shining with something brighter. I can't believe that just happened, he said, amazement threading through his voice. You faced it, she replied, grinning widely. You embraced the love around you. His smile deepened as he realized it was true. He had taken steps forward and claimed the acceptance and understanding he had longed for. And more than that, he felt lighter, fully aware that this journey was just beginning. Weeks turned into months, and together they continued to cultivate art, relationships, and hope. Daniel slowly reconnected with people in the community, healed bonds that had felt irreparably severed. Each piece of art he created was filled with emotion, stories crafted not just out of his pain, but also the paths he had forged with Sarah by his side. She had become his confidant, the person he never knew he needed. One evening, while they strolled under a sky punctuated with stars, Sarah turned to him and said, You've changed so much, Daniel. He chuckled softly, his fingers interlacing with hers. I wouldn't have made it this far without you. As the stars twinkled above them, Sarah felt a warmth swelling inside her. The bond they had built felt unbreakable, meaningful beyond words. "We all deserve second chances," she said gently. And they both knew then that their journey had only just begun. The story unfolding before them was rich with promise. The hard times had forged a deep connection, and with every brushstroke and shared laugh, they would continue to walk forward together. In that quiet moment under the starlit sky, they felt a sense of belonging, the promise made. They would not only embrace their pasts, but also seize whatever came next, hand in hand. And as they stood there, fingertips brushing against each other, Sarah and Daniel transformed their lives into a canvas of resilience, love, and rebirth. They had found each other through the shadows and would continue crafting a masterpiece of their own. In their hearts, they always knew they were ready to conquer the world together. The rain fell in heavy sheets, soaking the streets of the small town. Sarah leaned against the cafe window, nervously tapping her fingers on the glass. Inside, the warmth surrounded her, but her heart felt heavy with anticipation. Today, she was finally going to ask him. Daniel was an enigma wrapped in the warmth of his smile, an artist whose passion lit up every conversation they shared. They'd spent the last few weeks getting to know each other, but Sarah felt ready to take a step forward. So with a deep breath, she pushed open the door, the bell overhead tinkling softly. Daniel called from a corner table, a half-eaten scone sitting beside him. His hair was tousled and his eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. She replied, forcing a smile as she approached. As she slid into the chair across from him, she could feel her heart racing. When he raised an eyebrow, she gathered her courage. "Would you like to go to the art exhibit this weekend?" For a fleeting moment, the excitement danced in his eyes, but it quickly flickered away. The words hit her like a splash of ice water. "No, I really can't," he said, and the warmth that had filled their conversation vanished. She echoed, her heart sinking. "What kind of plans?" "It's complicated," he replied, his eyes drifting away. She asked, confusion bubbling inside her. "What does that even mean?" "Sarah, please." His voice was firm, and before she could respond, he stood up, slipping out of the cafe and leaving her alone, stunned. The door swung shut behind him, and the warmth rushed out, leaving her damp and cold. With a throbbing heart, she fished her phone from her bag and stared at the screen, the pings of notifications fading into the background noise. Why did he push her away like that? As the night stretched on, Sarah's mind couldn't stop racing. She typed his name into her search bar, fingers trembling as she pressed enter. The results rushed to life, filling the screen with a blend of social media profiles and event announcements. But then her eyes landed on something darker, a headline that made her stomach drop. Her heart raced as she clicked the link, the words spilling across the page, weaving a story that felt more like a nightmare than reality. The article painted Daniel in shades of betrayal, detailing how he had mismanaged funds during a local art fair, an event that had once brought the community together. Suddenly, the laughter and lightness of their conversation seemed like a distant memory, drowned out by accusations and scorn. Bile rose in her throat as she read through the details. There were quotes from community members, each one cutting deeper. "He ruined everything," one said. The more she scrolled, the more her heart shattered. This man she had been drawn to so powerfully had a shadow hanging over his head, a history that made his easy smile feel loaded. The anger clawed at her, not at Daniel, but at the circumstances he had faced. Why hadn't he told her? Did he think she would judge him? Determined to learn more, she needed to confront him. If there was one thing she couldn't stand, it was the unanswered questions that lodged in her mind like a splinter. Days passed, and with each one, the feeling nagged at her until she couldn't ignore it any longer. Finally, Sarah returned to the cafe. The soft chatter and warmth greeted her like an embrace, but her heart hammered with anxiety. She scanned the room until she spotted him. Daniel sat at the same table, sketchbook open, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Hey," she said, approaching slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. His head snapped up, surprise flickering across his face. "Sarah," but the enthusiasm barely masked the uncertainty in his eyes. She asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions roaring inside her. Sure," he said, but she could tell he was on edge. She asked, urgency flashing in her eyes. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "It's complicated," he repeated, a familiar barrier rising once more. She watched him closely, feeling the weight of the moment. "I deserve to know." For a long moment, Daniel didn't speak. Then finally his shoulders slumped, and he let out a breath he seemed to be holding with all his might. "I didn't want you to find out the way you did," she echoed, heart racing with empathy. "You mean the article, Daniel, that doesn't define who you are." "That story isn't just a story to me," he said, his voice cracking. "It's my life. I thought I could create something beautiful for the community, and it all fell apart." She pressed, leaning closer. "You haven't let the world see who you really are. You're not just that artist. You're a person, and you made a mistake." He whispered, uncertainty clouding his eyes. She implored, her voice rising with passion. "You keep pushing forward, Daniel. You can't let fear stop you from living your life." Silence enveloped them, and she could see the flicker of conflict behind his eyes. I do, and you should too. Let's start small, show me your art. His gaze softened just a little. It's hard. It's time to stop hiding, she urged, warmth flooding her voice. Take the jump, let the community see what you're capable of. You're not that article. As the days melted into weeks, something slowly transformed between them. Daniel began to open up, sharing his sketches and pouring out his ideas. With each passing day, Sarah felt the spark of what they had together blossoming into something deeper. They laughed, leaned into their creativity, and slowly the darkness surrounding Daniel seemed to lift. She watched him reclaiming his passion for art, and it filled her heart with joy. But even though progress was made, shadows still loomed. He would often pull back, the walls rising again as doubt seeped into his thoughts. He'd fret during their brainstorming sessions. She'd reply, striving to lift his spirits. You need to believe that you're worthy of love and support. Finally, after weeks of planning, the night of his showcase arrived. The small gallery they had rented buzzed with anticipation. Sarah could see Daniel standing near the entrance, shifting nervously on his feet, eyes darting around the room. She asked softly, holding his arm gently. Ready? I'm terrified, he admitted, looking desperate. Good, it means you're alive. Now show them your heart, she encouraged, her gaze steady. As guests trickled in, Sarah watched Daniel's expression slowly morph, first from fear to something lighter as compliments began to flow. Conversations brimmed with laughter, and joy enveloped the room like an embrace. One guest exclaimed, admiration evident in their voice. With each interaction, Daniel began to unfurl like a flower blooming, sharing stories filled with truth and vulnerability, weaving the narrative of his journey. Laughter echoed, and the air thickened with connection. But a stirring in the crowd caught her eye. A familiar face emerged, a member of his past. Daniel's former friend who had once turned against him now stood there, hesitant. Sarah could feel the air shift, tense and charged. Daniel, the man said, voice wavering. I want to apologize. I didn't understand the whole story back then. Daniel's body stiffened, but he took a deep breath. Thank you for saying that. As they engaged in conversation, Sarah felt a tide of hope rising within her. This was a moment of reconciliation for both men. Daniel was facing his past, and the acceptance hung beautifully in the air, a reminder of how far he had come. Hours passed, and the showcase began to wind down. Sarah stood back, watching all that he had accomplished. The room buzzed with conversations, a heartbeat strong with community that he had once lost. But just as she felt the warm reality of their triumph, another familiar face entered, one Daniel hadn't noticed. It was someone from the press, eyes scanning the gallery with intent. Panic flickered in Daniel's eyes, and she could see the walls start to rise. Not now, he whispered, throat tightening. Stay grounded, she urged gently, gripping his hand. This is your moment. The journalist approached, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Daniel Reed, he began, his voice cutting through the air with a sharp edge. There are still whispers about your past. Time froze as the weight of the question loomed. Daniel paled, the room falling silent as every eye fixed on him, held captive by what would come next. Everything they had worked for rested on the precipice of this moment. Sarah squeezed his hand, her heart pounding, praying he wouldn't crumble. The gallery swirled around them, friends exchanging glances, anticipation hanging thick and taut. Daniel, the journalist, pressed, eyes gleaming with just the right amount of malice. In that electrifying moment, Daniel drew in a deep breath. And as he prepared to respond, uncertainty and courage fought for dominance within him. Would he reclaim his narrative, or would fear silence him once more? The air thickened with tension as an unexpected silence stretched. The room held its breath, waiting to see if Daniel would step into the light or retreat into the shadows. And just before the truth would spill from his lips, the world around them faded, leaving them at the edge of something monumental.